I never thought I'd be that kid, the one who gets lost on a field trip, but as the sun dipped below the tree-line, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I realized with growing horror that I had no idea where I was or how to get back to my class. It started as a normal day. Our biology teacher, Mr. Henderson, had organized this trip to Blackwood National Forest to study ecosystems. I remember how excited everyone was on the bus ride over. We joked about seeing bears or wolves, but deep down, we knew the scariest thing we'd encounter would probably be a squirrel. As we hiked along the main trail, Mr. Henderson pointed out various plants and fungi. I was only half listening, more interested in the way the sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. That's when I saw it, a flash of vibrant blue among the sea of green. "Hey, what's that?" I called out, already stepping off the path. Mr. Henderson turned. "What's what, Alex?" But I was already pushing through the underbrush, drawn by curiosity. "I think I saw some kind of blue flower. It looked really cool." "Alex, wait. Don't go off the trail." Mr. Henderson's voice faded as I pressed forward. I should have listened, but the forest seemed to beckon me deeper, whispering promises of discovery. The blue flower remained elusive, always just out of sight. Before I knew it, I couldn't hear my classmates anymore. Still, I wasn't worried. I'd find my way back easily enough. Or so I thought. As the minutes ticked by, a tendril of unease began to curl in my stomach. The trees all looked the same, tall pines stretching endlessly in every direction. I spun around, trying to retrace my steps, but nothing looked familiar. "Hello," I called out. "Mr. Henderson?" "Guys!" Only the rustle of leaves answered me. I fumbled for my phone, heart sinking as I saw no signal mocking me from the top of the screen. Still, I tried to call Mr. Henderson, then my parents, then 911. Nothing went through. The forest, which had seemed so inviting earlier, now felt oppressive. Shadows lengthened as the sun dipped lower, and an eerie quiet settled over everything. No birds chirping, no small animals scurrying about, just silence. I picked a direction and started walking, trying to keep my breathing steady. "It's fine," I muttered to myself. "They'll find you soon. Just stay calm." But as the light faded, so did my optimism. The temperature dropped, and I hugged myself, wishing I brought a jacket. Every snapping twig made me jump. Was that the search party? Or something else? In the growing darkness, my imagination ran wild. What kind of animals lived in these woods? I thought of every horror movie I'd ever seen, every campfire story about people going missing in the forest. My heart raced, and I had to remind myself that those were just stories. This was real life. Nothing bad was going to happen. A howl in the distance shattered that illusion. I broke into a run, branches whipping at my face as I crashed through the undergrowth. Rational thought fled, replaced by primal fear. I ran until my lungs burned, until I tripped over a root and went sprawling. For a moment, I just lay there, gasping for breath, feeling the damp earth beneath me. Tears stung my eyes. How had this happened? How had a simple field trip turned into this nightmare? As my breathing slowed, I forced myself to think. Panicking wouldn't help. I needed a plan. Reluctantly, I pulled out my phone again. The battery was at 15%. I'd wasted too much power trying to call for help earlier. I turned on the flashlight, knowing it would drain the battery faster but needing to see. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a small circle around me. Everything beyond remained pitch black. I picked a direction and started walking again, this time more slowly, more deliberately. I listened for any sound of running water, knowing that following a stream might lead me to civilization. Hours passed, or maybe it just felt that way. My legs ached, and hunger gnawed at my stomach. The forest seemed to change at night, familiar shapes transforming into looming monsters. More than once, I thought I saw eyes gleaming in the darkness, only to blink and find nothing there. My phone beeped. 5% battery remaining. I knew I should turn off the flashlight to conserve power, but the thought of being plunged into total darkness terrified me. Instead, I recorded a quick video message, just in case. "Mom, Dad, if you find this." My voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I should have listened to Mr. Henderson. I love you guys." As soon as I stopped recording, guilt washed over me. What was I doing? I wasn't going to die out here. They would find me. I just had to stay positive. I trudged on, each step feeling heavier than the last. The forest floor was uneven, hidden roots and rocks threatening to trip me with every step. My flashlight beam grew weaker, flickering ominously. Then, without warning, it died. The darkness that engulfed me was absolute. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. Panic clawed at my throat, threatening to overwhelm me. I stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to stay still. A twig snapped nearby. I whirled towards the sound, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Hello," I called out, my voice small and trembling. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then a rustling. Closer this time. I backed away slowly, hands outstretched, feeling for trees or obstacles. My back hit something solid, a tree trunk. I pressed against it, trying to make myself as small as possible. The rustling grew louder. Whatever it was big, and it was coming closer. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if that would somehow protect me. My mind raced through possibilities. Bear, wolf, mountain lion? Or was it something worse? Something that shouldn't exist outside of nightmares? A beam of light cut through the darkness. "Alex? Alex, is that you?" Mr. Henderson's voice was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I sagged against the tree, relief making my knees weak. "Here," I croaked. "I'm over here." Footsteps crashed through the underbrush, and suddenly I was enveloped in a bear hug. Mr. Henderson's familiar aftershave mixed with the scent of pine needles and sweat. "Thank God," he muttered. "We've been searching for hours. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the full weight of what had happened hit me. Tears spilled down my cheeks. Mr. Henderson kept an arm around my shoulders as he guided me back to the main search party. Park rangers with trained dogs, local police, even a few volunteers from town had all joined in the search. I was overwhelmed by the number of people who had come out to look for me. As we hiked back to the ranger station, Mr. Henderson filled me in on what had happened after I wandered off. They had searched the immediate area for almost an hour before calling for help. My parents had been notified and were waiting anxiously at the station. The reunion with my parents was a blur of tears and hugs. My mom couldn't stop touching me, as if afraid I'd disappear again if she let go. My dad, usually so stoic, had red-rimmed eyes. Later, after I'd been checked over by a paramedic and given some food and water, a park ranger sat down with me. "You're lucky," she said, her tone gentle but serious. "We've had people get lost out there for days. Some were never found." I shuddered, imagining spending another night in those woods. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to cause so much trouble." She nodded. "I know, but this is why we always stress the importance of staying on marked trails. Nature can be beautiful, but it can also be dangerous if you're not prepared." As we drove home, exhaustion finally caught up with me. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the car window, watching the trees fly by. They didn't seem so menacing now, bathed in the early morning light. I thought about the blue flower that had lured me off the path. Had it even been real? Or was it just my mind playing tricks, seeing what it wanted to see? In the end, it didn't matter. What mattered was a lesson I'd learned. One I'd carry with me for the rest of my life. Respect nature, stick to the path, and always let someone know where you're going. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a silent promise to myself. Next time I went into the woods, I'd be prepared. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find that elusive blue flower. But this time, I'd do it safely, with a guide, proper equipment, and a healthy respect for the wild. The forest may have swallowed my scream, but it hadn't swallowed me. I had survived, and I had a story to tell. A story of fear, of resilience, and ultimately of hope. One moment, I was standing on solid ground, surrounded by my classmates on our geology field trip. The next, I was plummeting into darkness, my scream echoing off unseen walls as I fell. It was supposed to be a routine excursion, a chance for us to see real-world examples of the geological formations we'd been studying in class. Our teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, had been explaining the karst topography of the area, pointing out sinkholes and caves formed by the erosion of limestone bedrock. "Remember," she'd said, tapping her walking stick on the ground for emphasis, "the earth beneath our feet is constantly changing. What looks solid may be hiding cavities and weaknesses we can't see." If only I'd known how prophetic those words would be. I remember the exact moment it happened. I'd stepped away from the group to get a better angle for a photo of a particularly interesting rock formation. The ground felt solid under my feet, no different from anywhere else we'd walked that day. Then came a sound like a gunshot, a sharp crack that made everyone jump. Before I could even process what was happening, the earth beneath me gave way. The fall seemed to last forever, and no time at all. My stomach lurched as I plummeted, my arms flailing uselessly as I tried to grab onto something, anything. Rocks and dirt rained down with me, pelting my skin. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. For a moment, I lay there, dazed, trying to catch my breath. The fall had been shorter than it felt, maybe 15 or 20 feet, but it was enough. As the dust settled, I became aware of a throbbing pain in my left ankle. I tried to move it and hissed through clenched teeth. Sprained, maybe broken. Not good. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and muffled in the darkness. "Can anyone hear me?" Faint voices drifted down from above, panicked and indistinct. A circle of light appeared, seeming impossibly far away. Faces peered down, backlit by the sun. "Oh my God, Sarah, are you okay?" That was Ms. Rodriguez, her usual calm demeanor cracking with worry. "I think so," I called back, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "My ankle hurts, but I don't think anything's broken." "Don't move," she ordered. "We're calling for help. Just stay still and try to stay calm." Stay calm, right? Easier said than done when you're at the bottom of a sinkhole. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I started to make out my surroundings. I'd landed on a slope of loose soil and rocks, which had probably saved me from more serious injury. The walls of the sinkhole were jagged limestone, pockmarked with smaller holes and crevices. And there, just visible in the faint light filtering down from above, was a dark opening in one wall, a cave entrance. A shiver ran down my spine. What if there were animals down here? Bats, maybe, or something worse? I tried to push the thought away, focusing instead on assessing my situation. My backpack had fallen with me, its contents now strewn across the sinkhole floor. I spotted my water bottle a few feet away and stretched to grab it, wincing as the movement jostled my injured ankle. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. I could hear activity above. Voices shouting, the crackle of radios, the distant wail of sirens. But down here, in the cool damp of the sinkhole, everything felt muffled and far away. I don't know how long I sat there, alternating between calling up to my classmates for updates and trying to distract myself by identifying the rock formations around me. Anything to keep my mind off the growing claustrophobia, the fear that at any moment the unstable ground might give way again, plunging me even deeper. Finally, a new voice called down. "Hello down there. This is Captain Rivera with the local fire department. We're going to get you out, but I need you to tell me exactly what you see around you." I described the sinkhole as best I could, its rough dimensions, the slope I was sitting on, the cave entrance I'd spotted. "Okay, good," Captain Rivera said. "Now, this is very important. I need you to stay exactly where you are. Don't try to move, and especially don't go near that cave entrance. The ground is very unstable, and we don't want to risk another collapse. Can you do that for me?" "Yes," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll stay put." More time passed. I heard the whir of machinery being set up, the shouts of rescue workers coordinating their efforts. The circle of sky above me was gradually obscured by ropes and harnesses being lowered into position. Then, without warning, a low rumble filled the air. The ground beneath me shifted, sending a cascade of small rocks tumbling down the slope. I yelped, pressing myself against the sinkhole wall as best I could with my injured ankle. "What's happening?" I shouted, panic rising in my throat. "The ground is still settling," Captain Rivera called down, his voice tense. "We need to get you out of there now. I'm sending down a rescuer. When he reaches you, you need to do exactly what he says." "Okay." I nodded, then realized he couldn't see me. "Okay." I called back, my voice small and frightened. A figure appeared at the top of the sinkhole, then began to descend on a rope. As he got closer, I could see he was wearing a helmet with a light on it, illuminating the space around us. "Hi there," he said as he reached me, his voice calm and reassuring. "I'm Jake. Let's get you out of here, shall we?" He worked quickly, securing me into a harness while being careful of my injured ankle. All the while, the rumbling continued, growing louder. Small streams of dirt and pebbles were constantly falling now, adding to the debris around us. "Okay, we're ready," Jake called up. "Start lifting." As we began to rise, a loud crack echoed through the sinkhole. Jake's eyes widened and he pulled me close, shielding me with his body. "Faster," he shouted. "The whole thing's coming down." The ascent became a blur of motion and noise. Rocks clattered against Jake's helmet and shoulders as he kept himself between me and the collapsing walls. I squeezed my eyes shut, clinging to him as we swung and jerked on the rope. With a final heave, we cleared the top of the sinkhole. Strong hands grabbed us, pulling us to safety just as a thunderous crash signaled the complete collapse of the cavern below. I lay on the solid ground, gasping for breath, my whole body shaking. Paramedics swarmed around me, checking my vitals and immobilizing my ankle. But all I could focus on was the enormous cloud of dust rising from where the sinkhole had been. If we'd been down there just a few seconds longer. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of ambulance rides, x-rays, and worried phone calls from my parents. My ankle was indeed broken, but considering what could have happened, I knew I was incredibly lucky. As I lay in the hospital bed that night, my ankle freshly casted and elevated, I couldn't stop thinking about those terrifying moments underground. The darkness, the uncertainty, the very real possibility that I might not make it out alive. But I also thought about the incredible response. My teacher keeping me calm, the rescue workers risking their lives, Jake shielded me from falling debris. In the face of nature's raw power, human courage and compassion had won out. Ms. Rodriguez visited me in the hospital the next day, bringing a card signed by the entire class. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her eyes full of concern. "Better," I said, managing a small smile. "Still a bit shaken up, but better." She nodded, taking a seat beside my bed. "You know, what happened yesterday, it's a perfect example of why geology is so important. Understanding the Earth, its processes and potential dangers, can literally save lives." I thought about that, about how my textbook knowledge of sinkholes had suddenly become viscerally real. "I think I understand that a lot better now," I said. "Ms. Rodriguez smiled. "Well, when you're feeling up to it, I'd love to hear your first-hand account. It's not every day one of my students gets such an immersive field trip experience." I couldn't help but laugh at that, wincing a bit as the movement jostled my ankle. I think I've had enough immersive experiences for a while, I said. Maybe next field trip, we could stick to looking at rocks that are already on the surface. She chuckled, patting my hand. I think that can be arranged. As she left, I leaned back against my pillows, gazing out the window at the world outside. The ground beneath my feet would never feel quite as solid again, I knew. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe a healthy respect for the Earth's power, an understanding of its constant change, was exactly what I needed. The Earth had opened up and swallowed me whole. But I had emerged battered and bruised. Yes, but also wiser, more aware, and with a newfound appreciation for both the forces of nature and the human spirit. Whatever ground I walked on in the future, I knew I'd be walking with open eyes and a fuller understanding of the world beneath my feet. That's what our ski instructor told us on the first day of the trip, his eyes serious beneath his mirrored goggles. At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. Now, as I dig frantically through the snow, my friends' lives hanging in the balance, I understand the brutal truth of his words. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, a week-long ski adventure in the Swiss Alps to celebrate our high school graduation. 20 of us, along with 3 chaperones, had flown halfway across the world for this. The first few days were everything we dreamed of. Pristine slopes, breathtaking views, and the exhilarating rush of carving through fresh powder. But on day 4, everything changed. I remember waking up that morning to the sound of excited chatter. A fresh layer of snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the resort in a thick white carpet. Through the frosty window of our chalet, I could see my classmates already gathering outside, skis and snowboards in hand. "Come on, Jake," my roommate Tyler called as he zipped up his jacket. "We're heading to the North Face. It's gonna be epic." I hesitated, glancing at the trail map on the wall. The North Face was marked in red, expert terrain, off limits to our group according to the rules set by our chaperones. "I don't know, man," I said, pulling on my thermals. "Isn't that area out of bounds?" Tyler rolled his eyes. "Don't be such a buzzkill. Everyone's going. Besides, with all this fresh powder, it'll be perfectly safe." I should have argued harder, should have refused to go, maybe even told our chaperones what was being planned. But the excitement was contagious, and the thought of missing out was too much to bear. So I grabbed my gear and followed Tyler out into the crisp mountain air. There were 12 of us in total who set out that morning, sneaking past the boundary ropes when the ski patrol wasn't looking. The trek to the North Face took nearly an hour, but the view from the top was worth every step. Untouched snow stretched out before us, glittering in the morning sun like a sea of diamonds. For a moment, we all just stood there, drinking in the sight. Then someone whooped with joy, and we were off, carving our way down the mountain in a flurry of powder and adrenaline. The first run was incredible. The snow was deep and light, muffling the sound of our skis and boards as we glided through it. We regrouped at the bottom, faces flushed with excitement and cold. "That was insane," Emma laughed, shaking snow from her hair. "Let's go again." We should have quit while we were ahead, should have headed back to the main slopes, content with our one illicit run. But the thrill was too powerful, the lure of untracked snow too strong. On our third run, I noticed a change. The wind had picked up, whipping loose snow into the air and reducing visibility. The temperature seemed to drop by the minute, and an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. "Maybe we should head back," I suggested, raising my voice to be heard over the wind. But my words were lost in another excited cheer as the group pushed off for another run. I hesitated for a split second before following, not wanting to be left alone on the mountain. We were about halfway down when I heard it, a low rumble, like distant thunder. I turned to look upslope and felt my heart stop. A wall of snow was racing towards us, growing larger by the second. "Avalanche!" I screamed, my voice cracking with terror. "Get to the side!" Everything happened so fast after that. I remember the roar of the snow, the blind panic as I tried to ski out of its path. I remember seeing Tyler and Emma disappear under the white torrent, their screams cut short. When it was over, the silence was deafening. I found myself on the edge of the slide path, half buried but alive. As I struggled to free myself, I looked around in horror. Where moments ago there had been 12 of us, now I could only see 2 others, Alex and Mia, both looking as shell-shocked as I felt. "We have to find them," Mia said, her voice shaking. "They could still be alive under there." I nodded, fumbling for the avalanche beacon in my pocket. Thank God we'd all been required to wear them, even though we never thought we'd actually need to use them. The next hours were a blur of desperate searching and digging. The beacons led us to several locations, but the going was slow. The avalanche had compacted the snow into a substance almost as hard as concrete, and our small avalanche shovels seemed woefully inadequate. We found Tyler first, unconscious but breathing. Then Emma, who came to sputtering and coughing as we cleared the snow from her face. One by one, we located our friends, each discovery a mixture of relief and renewed fear for those still missing. But as the light began to fade and the temperature dropped even further, a horrible realization set in. We'd only found 10. 2 were still missing. "We can't stop," I insisted, my arms burning from hours of shoveling. "They're still out there." Alex put a hand on my shoulder. "Jake, we have to get help. It's getting dark, and some of these guys need medical attention. We can't do this alone." I knew he was right, but the thought of leaving anyone behind made me sick to my stomach. In the end, we had no choice. Alex and I would go for help, while Mia stayed behind with those we'd rescued, trying to keep them warm and conscious. The trek back to the resort was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every step felt like a betrayal of those we'd left behind. By the time we stumbled into the ski patrol office, night had fallen, and a full-scale search was already underway for our missing group. What followed was a whirlwind of activity: helicopters, search and rescue teams, frantic parents arriving from around the world. I was questioned by police, berated by our chaperones, hugged and scolded by my parents in equal measure. But through it all, I couldn't shake the image of that wall of snow bearing down on us. Couldn't stop hearing the muffled cries of my friends as we dug them out. It was nearly 24 hours later when we got the news. They had found the last 2 alive but severely hypothermic. Against all odds, an air pocket had formed around them, allowing them to survive until rescuers could reach them. As I sat in the hospital waiting room, waiting to hear more about my friends' conditions, the full weight of what had happened finally hit me. We'd been reckless, arrogant, thinking we could take on the mountain on our own terms. We'd ignored warnings, broken rules, and nearly paid the ultimate price. Our ski instructor's words came back to me, and I finally understood their true meaning. The mountain doesn't care if you live or die. It's not malicious, but it's not forgiving either. It simply is in all its beautiful, terrifying power, and it's up to us to approach it with the respect it deserves. In the days that followed, as my friends slowly recovered and we all grappled with the emotional aftermath of our ordeal, I made a promise to myself. I would never again underestimate the power of nature, never take unnecessary risks with my life or the lives of others. But I also promised that I wouldn't let fear rule me. The mountains had nearly taken everything from us, but they had also shown us the incredible strength of the human spirit. In our will to survive, in the rescuers who risked their lives to save us, in the bonds forged between us through our shared experience. As I stood outside the hospital, breathing in the crisp mountain air, I looked up at the snow-capped peaks in the distance. They were as beautiful as ever, but now I saw them with new eyes that recognized both their majesty and their danger, that understood the delicate balance between adventure and respect. The mountain doesn't care if you live or die, but I care, and I'll carry the lessons of that day with me for the rest of my life. A constant reminder of the power of nature and the precious fragility of life. I never believed in ghosts. At least, Not until that night on the Gettysburg battlefield, when history came alive in the most terrifying way possible. It was meant to be an educational experience, a chance for our high school history class to walk in the footsteps of soldiers who fought in one of the most pivotal battles of the American Civil War. 20 of us, along with our teacher, Mr. Hawkins, and 2 parent chaperones, had traveled from California to Pennsylvania for this 3-day trip. The first 2 days were fascinating but uneventful. We toured museums, examined artifacts, and listened to park rangers describe the strategies and struggles of both the Union and Confederate forces. But it was the twilight tour on our final evening that would change everything. "Now, class," Mr. Hawkins said as we gathered near the visitor center, his excitement palpable. "This is a special treat. We've been granted after-hours access to parts of the battlefield not usually open to the public at night. Remember, stay together, be respectful, and keep your eyes and ears open. History surrounds us here." As we set out, the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. A cool breeze rustled through the grass, carrying with it the earthy scent of autumn. Despite the beauty of the scene, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. It felt as if the very air was charged with something expectant. Our guide, a middle-aged woman named Sarah with a reverent demeanor, led us to an area known as the wheat field. As darkness fell, she spoke in hushed tones about the brutal fighting that had occurred here, describing how the field had changed hands 6 times in the span of 2 hours, with over 4,000 casualties. "It's said," Sarah whispered, her flashlight casting eerie shadows across her face, "that on some nights you can still hear the echoes of battle, the clash of bayonets, the cries of the wounded, the thunder of cannon fire." A few of my classmates exchanged skeptical glances. I caught my friend Mike's eye, and we both smirked. Ghost stories were for kids, not high school seniors. But as we moved deeper into the battlefield, the smirk faded from my face. The darkness seemed to press in around us, broken only by our flashlight beams and the pale glow of a waning moon. The wind picked up, carrying with it a chill that went beyond the autumn air. We stopped at the edge of a copse of trees, where Sarah began describing a flanking maneuver that had turned the tide of the battle in this area. Suddenly, she paused mid-sentence, her head tilted as if listening. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely audible. We all fell silent, straining our ears. At first, I heard nothing but the rustle of leaves and the pounding of my own heart. Then, faintly, I caught it, a sound like distant drums, a steady, ominous beat. "It's probably just a car stereo," Mike whispered, but he didn't sound convinced. The drumming grew louder, accompanied now by what sounded like muffled shouts and the metallic clang of equipment. Sarah's face had gone pale in the flashlight's glow. "In all my years giving tours," she said, her voice shaking, "I've never—" Her words were cut off by a sound that turned my blood to ice, a long, piercing wail that could only be described as an inhuman scream. It was followed by another, then another, until the air was filled with a cacophony of agonized cries. Panic erupted in our group. People were shouting, flashlight beams dancing wildly as everyone spun around, trying to locate the source of the sounds. Through the chaos, I caught glimpses of movement in the trees, flashes of gray and blue, the glint of metal. "Everyone stay calm," Mr. Hawkins shouted, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his own fear. "We need to head back to the visitor center. Now." We began to move, at first in an orderly line, then breaking into a run as the sounds intensified. The screams were closer now, interspersed with what sounded like gunfire and the clash of metal on metal. I ran blindly, my lungs burning, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of elaborate prank or reenactment. But deep down I knew this was something else entirely. Suddenly, my foot caught on something, sending me sprawling to the ground. My flashlight flew from my hand, its beam illuminating for a brief moment a sight that would haunt me forever. A figure in a tattered Union uniform, his face a ghastly mask of pain and fury, charging towards me with a bayonet raised. I scrambled backward, a scream caught in my throat. But before the spectral soldier could reach me, he vanished, like mist dissipating in sunlight. Shaking, I retrieved my flashlight and struggled to my feet. That's when I realized I was alone. In my panic, I'd veered off in the group and now found myself in a small clearing, surrounded by trees that seemed to loom menacingly in the darkness. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking. "Mr. Hawkins, Mike, anyone." Only the wind answered, carrying with it the fading echoes of battle. I spun in a circle, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, searching desperately for any sign of my classmates or the path back to safety. That's when I saw them, dozens of translucent figures moving through the trees. Some marched in formation, while others stumbled as if wounded. Their uniforms, both blue and gray, were torn and bloodstained, and their faces, God, their faces were the stuff of nightmares, contorted in expressions of rage, pain, and despair. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to even breathe. One of the figures, a young man who couldn't have been much older than me, turned and looked directly at me. His eyes widened in what seemed like surprise, and for a moment I saw not a fearsome apparition but a scared boy, thrust into a war he barely understood. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but before he could, a booming voice cut through the night. "Private, fall in line." The spectral soldier snapped to attention and rejoined the ghostly ranks, marching past me as if I were invisible. I watched transfixed as the phantom army moved through the clearing, reenacting a battle that had ended over 150 years ago. I don't know how long I stood there, witnessing that impossible scene. It could have been minutes or hours, but gradually, the visions began to fade, the sounds of battle growing fainter, until once again I was alone in the quiet darkness. Emily, where are you?" Mr. Hawkins' voice, tinged with panic, snapped me out of my trance. I turned to see flashlight beams moving through the trees towards me. "Here," I called back, my voice hoarse. "I'm over here." Moments later, I was surrounded by my classmates and teachers, all talking at once, asking if I was okay, where I'd been, what had happened. I opened my mouth to explain, but found I couldn't put the experience into words. How could I describe what I'd seen without sounding completely insane? As we made our way back to the visitor center, I listened to the others recount their own experiences. Strange sounds, glimpses of figures that couldn't be real, an overwhelming sense of dread and sorrow. Each story was different, yet they all shared a common thread of the inexplicable. Sarah, our guide, was waiting for us at the center, her face ashen. "In all my years," she kept saying, shaking her head in disbelief. That night, back at our hotel, none of us could sleep. We gathered in the lobby, speaking in hushed tones about what we'd experienced. Theories were proposed and debated. Mass hallucination, an elaborate hoax, or something truly supernatural. Whatever it was, Mr. Hawkins said, his voice solemn, I think we've all gained a new appreciation for the reality of what happened here. These weren't just names in a history book. They were real people, with hopes and fears and lives cut tragically short. As my classmates nodded in agreement, I thought back to the young soldier I'd seen, the one who had looked at me with such surprise and recognition. In that moment, the distance of history had vanished. I'd seen not an enemy or a faceless casualty statistic, but a person not so different from myself. The next morning, as our bus pulled away from Gettysburg, I gazed out the window at the now peaceful fields. The events of the previous night already felt like a dream, but their impact lingered. I knew that my understanding of history, and perhaps of reality itself, had been forever changed. I still don't know if what we experienced that night was truly supernatural or simply the product of overactive imaginations in a place heavy with history. But I do know this. The past is never as distant as we think. Sometimes, in the right conditions, the veil between then and now grows thin. And in those moments, we're reminded that the echoes of history continue to shape our world in ways we can scarcely comprehend. The dead may not always rest in peace, but perhaps in their restlessness, they have something to teach us about sacrifice, about the horrors of war, and about our shared humanity that transcends time itself. The mountain doesn't forgive mistakes. Neither do gravity or momentum. As I hurtle down this unforgiving trail, these are the only thoughts crashing through my mind, besides the deafening scream of brake. But let me back up. How did I, Jamie Cooper, honor roll student and self-proclaimed indoor kid, end up careening down a mountain on two wheels with no way to stop? It all started with our school's Adventure Week, a misguided attempt to get us tech-addicted teens to connect with nature before graduation. When the sign-up sheet went around, I figured mountain biking would be the least of all evils. How hard could it be? You just sit and pedal, right? Oh, how wrong I was. Our group arrived at Whispering Pines Mountain Resort on a crisp Monday morning. The air was thick with the scent of pine and excitement. Well, excitement from everyone but me. While my classmates chattered about sick jumps and gnarly trails, I eyed the towering peaks with growing apprehension. Our instructor, a lanky guy named Cliff with sun-weathered skin and a perpetual grin, sized us up as we gathered around him. Kurat, Gung, who here's ridden before. Most hands shot up. Mine stayed firmly at my side. Cliff's eyes landed on me. First timer, huh? No worries. We'll start you on the beginner trail. You'll be shredding in no time. His enthusiasm did little to quell the butterflies in my stomach. We spent the morning going over basics, proper stance, gear shifting, and most importantly, braking. Remember, Cliff emphasized, on steep descents, ease on those brakes. Too hard and you'll flip. Not enough and, well, you'll get really acquainted with gravity. After lunch, we hit the trails. True to his word, Cliff started me on the gentlest slope imaginable. I wobbled and weaved, but managed to stay upright. By the end of the day, I was cautiously optimistic. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. Days 2 and 3 saw steady improvement. I graduated from the bunny slope to some intermediate trails. Don't get me wrong, I was no pro, but I was starting to understand the appeal. The rush of wind in my face, the satisfaction of conquering a tricky turn. It was exhilarating in a way I'd never experienced before. Then came day 4, the day everything went sideways. Literally, we gathered at the base of a new trail. All right, hotshots, Cliff announced. Today we're tackling Widowmaker. A collective gasp went through the group. Even I'd heard whispers about Widowmaker, the resort's most challenging trail, full of steep drops and hairpin turns. Now, Cliff continued, noting our reactions. We're not doing the whole thing, just the upper section. It's advanced, sure, but nothing you can't handle if you remember your training. As we loaded onto the ski lift, my friend Zach nudged me. You nervous, Cooper? I shrugged, aiming for nonchalance. Nah, we've got this. The view from the top was breathtaking, and not just because of the altitude. Miles of forest stretched below us, painting the landscape in 1,000 shades of green. For a moment, I forgot my nervousness, lost in the beauty of it all. Reality came crashing back as Cliff gathered us for a final briefing. Listen up, this trail is no joke. Stay focused, control your speed, and for the love of all that's holy, do not, I repeat, do not leave the marked path. There are some pretty gnarly off-trail sections up here. Stick to the route, and you'll be fine. Any questions? We shook our heads, a mix of excitement and trepidation palpable in the air. All right then, let's ride! One by one, my classmates disappeared down the trail. Soon, it was just Zach and me at the top. Ladies first, he grinned, gesturing towards the trail. I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling. Taking a deep breath, I pushed off. The first part wasn't so bad. Steep, sure, but manageable. I found a rhythm, leaning into turns, easing on the brakes for the descents. This isn't so terrible, I thought. Maybe I finally got the hang of this. Pride, as they say, goeth before a fall. Rounding a bend, I came face to face with a fork in the trail. The left path, clearly marked, wound its way down the mountain in a series of switchbacks. The right path, unmarked and overgrown, plunged straight down at an alarmingly steep angle. In that split second of indecision, disaster struck. A pine cone, of all things, sent my front wheel skidding. I overcorrected, veering sharply to the right. Before I could process what was happening, I was barreling down the forbidden path, picking up speed with each passing second. Panic set in. I squeezed the brakes, but they seemed laughably inadequate against the mountain's pull. Trees whipped by in a green blur. The trail, if you could call it that, was a gauntlet of rocks and roots, each threatening to send me flying. Jamie, Zach's voice echoed from somewhere behind me, but I couldn't spare a glance back. All my focus was on the nightmare unfolding before me. A large root loomed ahead. In a desperate move, I yanked the handlebars, barely clearing it. The maneuver sent me into an even steeper section. The world tilted crazily. I was no longer riding the bike, so much as trying to stay on top of an out-of-control missile. Through the rush of wind and the pounding of my heart, a memory surfaced. Cliff's voice. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you can't stop, look for a safe place to bail. Better a controlled crash than riding off a cliff. Easier said than done when the entire mountain seems hell-bent on killing you. But as I hurtled around another bend, I saw it. A small clearing to my left, relatively free of rocks and mercifully flat. It was my only chance. Summoning every ounce of courage and stupidity I possessed, I leaned hard to the left. The bike protested, wobbling dangerously but complied. As I hit the clearing, I did the only thing left to do. I jumped. Time seemed to slow. I was airborne, the ground rushing up to meet me. In that eternal moment, a calm clarity washed over me. So this is how it ends, I thought. Death by mountain bike. Mom's going to be so pissed. Then I hit the ground, and time snapped back into its normal flow. I rolled, tumbled, and skidded, the world a kaleidoscope of sky and earth. When I finally came to a stop, every inch of me screamed in protest. But I was alive. I lay there, gasping, trying to catalog my injuries. Nothing felt broken, miraculously. Just a symphony of scrapes, bruises, and what would undoubtedly be some spectacular soreness tomorrow. Jamie. Oh my God, Jamie. Zach's frantic voice preceded his arrival. He half ran, half slid down the slope, eyes wide with panic. Are you okay? That was the craziest thing I've ever seen. I managed a weak thumbs up. I'm alive, I think. Zach helped me to a sitting position, his face a mix of relief and disbelief. Dude, when you went down that trail, I thought, I've never been so scared in my life. Join the club, I croaked. It took Cliff and the rest of the group about 15 minutes to reach us. By then, the adrenaline had worn off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and the dawning realization of just how close I'd come to serious injury, or worse. As Cliff checked me over for injuries, his earlier grin was nowhere to be seen. You're one lucky kid, you know that? I've seen experienced riders get taken out by less. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The trek back to the resort was a blur. My classmates alternated between concerned inquiries about my well-being and excited recountings of my epic wipeout. I answered on autopilot, my mind still reeling from the experience. That evening, as I lay in bed, every muscle protesting, I reflected on the day's events. I'd always thought of myself as cautious, risk-averse, the kind of person who color codes their calendar and triple checks their homework. Yet here I was, having survived an adventure worthy of an action movie. There's a saying that life begins at the edge of your comfort zone. I'd always dismissed it as cheesy motivational poster fodder. But now, having stared down that edge and gone careening over it, I understood. It wasn't about seeking out danger or being reckless. It was about facing your fears, pushing your limits, and discovering strengths you never knew you had. As I drifted off to sleep, one thought echoed through my mind. I can't wait to get back on that bike tomorrow. The mountain may not forgive mistakes, but it does offer second chances to those brave enough or foolish enough to try again